Hello and welcome to Blogosphere, Serious Influence, the podcast all about the business side of the influencer industry. I'm Alice Audley and I'm the founder of Blogosphere. We run events, a magazine, an influencer network, and now a podcast too, which I'll be presenting. If there are any questions about the influencer industry that you want answered, please do drop me an email at alice@blogospheremagazine.com. We're delighted to announce that Series 3 of Serious Influence has an exclusive sponsor, the music licensing platform Licked. Licked provide commercial music from real labels for licensing into creators' content. It means that you can have great music on your videos without the fear of copyright claims or losing ad revenue. If you want to learn more about how you can legally use the music you love, be sure to check out Licked's website, licked.co. That's lickd.co. Today on Blogosphere Serious Influence, I'm joined by Adam Ward, who is an influencer marketing consultant. Adam has worked at agencies including Cake, Dare and Hey Human, and specialises in influencer marketing strategy. Now consulting at Tailify, he has a keen interest in creative and data, and illustrating what the return on investment of influencer marketing can be.
My name is Adam Ward. I'm an influencer marketing consultant, currently working with brands, agencies, and also spend a bit of time getting under the skin of actual creators and influencers themselves and working with them to try and see it from both sides of the industry. So yeah, I've been sort of focusing on that for the last probably 6 months as a consultant.
Where did your career start when you got your first job? What were you doing at university? Where did you think you were going to go and how did you stumble into this world?
It was sort of an unexpected journey. I was at the University West of England in Bristol, UE, Premium Quality Polytech at the time.
What year was that?
Oh, it must have been 2012, I think, graduated. Did a degree in drama and creative writing. So the thought of doing advertising, marketing or anything like that wasn't even on my mind. Left university with the ambition to become a stand-up comedian, a writer and an actor. Did that for probably 4 months in London and then was like, I really need to eat, so I'm probably going to have to get a job and make some money. And just sort of started applying for different things and thought, actually, if I go across the board and look anything I might be interested in, and sort of found advertising, marketing. I sort of had done business studies and things at school, so sort of had an idea of what it was, and got a job as an intern at Cake, which was part of Havas. I think they've sort of merged with Havas now, but that was sort of the kickstart for me, where I spent 3 months working in every different department and was fortunate enough that there was a new strategist that came across from the BBC, a guy called Audley, who was a bit of an inspiration really, and took me to one side and said, actually, your drama and creative writing, you're really into storytelling, and strategy might fit the bill there, because strategy is, or advertising is, storytelling to get people to do something. So that was sort of the shift then in mindset of, okay, if I can't be an actor or a comedian, I still love telling stories, and this might be an outlet for me to be able to do that and fulfill those sort of desires. And then from there, focusing on brand strategy, social strategy, digital strategy across various different agencies. And then probably about 3 or 4 years ago, really started to focus that on sort of influencer marketing.
Was that at Havas then? So
No. I had went and worked at Dare for a bit on the BMW account, which was a great experience, because from working across multiple different brands to then actually go, I'm just going to work on one and really get under the skin of what that brand represents, who their target consumers are, and try and understand on a deeper level what brands are doing.
So what did you do during that time then, getting under the skin? But were you writing campaigns that for people?
As part of sort of any strategy job, it was, brief by brief. But the first time I had a chance to say, when you're working on one individual brand, and something that actually now how I try and think about working on strategies and campaigns is take a step back and try and think bigger than what's just on the piece of paper in front of you. So you've kind of got to understand a brand and a business or a product to then sort of be able to respond to the brief, because that's a second layer of, we're trying to do this now. Otherwise you just silo the brief and it doesn't really fit into the rest of the campaign or the rest of the brand narrative and story. So the focus was really there. It was still telling a story, but a different, what's the platform? How best are we going to get this message across?
What were those platforms at that time that you were?
So the main focus there of obviously Facebook, Twitter, Instagram was coming to be a bit of a player, but the focus there was really, it was very visual. So Facebook was still sort of that video platform, sharing content, telling longer form stories, as I think it sort of kind of still is now. As an example, on BMW, we would demonstrate 3-4 minute video of a car. Maybe it might be a look around the car, what are the features, and hero that on Facebook. But then on Instagram, it was more about, here's the alloys or the different alloy. And it was just static, sort of carousel across 4 different alloys you can get on the car. Primarily because we were working with 2 different audiences. As a visual platform, people actually maybe didn't own a BMW but loved BMW and the cars, so that was them sort of the inspiration and aspiration side that Instagram offered, whereas Facebook was very much that sales channel. And then Twitter for me has always been an interesting one for brands, because I don't think anybody's nailed it properly, and everybody always uses the example of Innocent and what they do, and the big things with the spikes around sort of planet Earth and things like that. But it's
like comedy, sort of.
Yeah, comedy.
Wendy's do quite well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Twitter needs a real informed strategy, because I very much believe there is a huge place for Twitter and the social conversation, but it feels like it's very led by the people and the users, as opposed to when the brands are trying to create conversation. Often you don't want to force it, and I think there's a tendency and potential that that's what's going to happen on there. So Twitter can be leveraged really well. I'm not an expert on it.
I think brands do leverage it quite well around Love Island as an example of when they do it.
Yeah.
There's the sort of fight between Boohoo and ASOS for Ovi. That's funny.
Yeah, massively. And in those contexts, it's sort of real time, which is how people use it. The commentary of, unlike the old school Facebook model, which was, I'm going to write a status about how I'm feeling. That can sort of be past tense, as it were. Whereas people are more like, I'm seeing something in the moment and commentate. So that's where it can be used really well. I think if that's your strategy, superb, and I'm sure it works. But the longer term of storytelling that I think other platforms can offer,
it doesn't quite have the same place yet.
Yes, it's part of a big puzzle of marketing and advertising. So it's not like don't use it, it's find the right way for you and your brand.
So when was the year that you came across influencers then? And how did that happen?
Having worked in social and content and digital sort of marketing advertising side of things, it's always been floating around. I think the first time was probably about 3-4 years ago. I was working at an agency called Hey Human. Amazing agency with a really interesting proposition, which is very much focused on behavioral economics and the psychology of how people interact with adverts and how the brain works and absorbs information and things like that. I fell in love with that proposition, and I was like, this is a different dynamic to what other agencies are doing. They had a lot of clients there that had started to think about how can we use influencers, and although they were leveraging them and using them, they were actually using them in a way which was more, they're just a content creator, which for the brands, Sony Mobile was an example of the brand that they were using them for. I was like, okay, how can we turn this up a gear? How do we actually not just use influencers in a way that, people are talking about it, we should probably do it, but think about our agency proposition, our approach to social and digital, and then begin to shape a narrative which works in a way that actually creates action from the audience. They have built an audience like influencers and creators and the traditional, I would say traditional influencers and creators, creative first, people who are born on YouTube or Instagram, built their following that way, have the power to do that. And are we doing it properly? So that was the first step of how do we use them more effectively? And then the second part of that was, and I've always had an issue with the industry in terms of metrics and how they're measuring, and it's always very vanity, sort of views were great, likes were great, and all this kind of stuff was, okay, but how are we measuring that? How are we measuring the actual behaviour of what's happening? So that was the starting point for me, where I was like, we're actually in a really interesting dynamic and a shift here to a space where we as brands can start to be potentially quite clever and interesting of how we're working with these normal people who have a massive audience, and we're buying in a different way. We're not buying to throw advertising down people's throats. We're buying because we can see a relationship, and therefore we should be able to get something back. So that was the start for me, and it just grew from there.
Did you have the tools at the agency to do that sort of tracking?
End to end, no, because I think at that time, and I still think there's a massive gap at the moment where there's a need to marry up, if you're working on a brief or a campaign which is performance-led, I need to drive sales. As an agency often, or, you can do so much, I can measure up to a click and getting someone there, but often the dots aren't connected between them. I need to know what's going on your website and how many sales. And brands will maybe after the campaign go, okay, well, here's all the sales we made. But the problem there for me is you can't optimize because I don't know what's happened in between. I don't know why we've sold that many or haven't sold or what's going on in the intermediate. And there's no real platforms, a single platform that can do that. The company I was at before being consultant, Peg, sort of got to that point, but there's still a reliance on brand and agency shaking hands and going, we're in agreement that you can look at the data on the back end to be able to do that. So,
and is that quite hard to get that shaking of hands?
I suppose it can be. I mean, it just depends on the level of relationship you've got. You can go off on a tangent about, if people are going to complain or talk about, we can't measure the actual success of influencer marketing. Well, if you're not giving us the opportunity as a brand to do that, of course we can't. But we can measure ROI. We just have to start connecting the dots. Or if we're not going to do that, and that's a performance-driven campaign, but the flip side of it and the approach is also, what are we trying to do? Because the data is available, it's just, are we looking in the wrong places? Because if I'm trying to create conversation or understand the reception of a piece of content that's gone out, I can see the comments, like, shares, all of that kind of stuff, but I need to start spending more time reading what the comments are, because that in itself is a behavioural shift of, okay, are people commenting, oh, the brand looks really great, what a great partnership, or are they just commenting, oh, I love your hair? When I'm not talking about a hair product or anything, I'm talking about a brand, that's why I've paid that person. So they do exist, but we're just not on a base level looking for them.
Would you say that your interest is split 50-50 with actually, what drew you into the industry at the beginning, the creative and finding an outlet for your storytelling, but then you're also fascinated by like the data side and the numbers? Is that something that took you by surprise, that you would be that interested in that side?
Yeah, maybe. I've never really thought about it that way. I think it's part and parcel of the job. If you want to do effective marketing, you need to understand what's happening. I need to know what's happened before. I need to know what's happened afterwards. I need all of that so I can optimize and make things better. Within the context of influencer marketing or just the journey I've been on, you can't have a story and drive performance, and if you're driving performance, you've probably got a good story. So they sort of come hand in hand. And to answer your question, I never thought data would become something I'm super interested in, but you can't create strategy without data, and you just can't understand what's going on with their campaign, the effectiveness of it, without really considering all of those aspects of it. They're all part of one.
Do you think in influencer marketing on the whole, people aren't as studious on the data as they should be?
Massively. I think the industry is 95% execution, 5% strategy, if that at best. People may talk about it, but it's...
Why do you think that is? Is it laziness?
Laziness, poor practice. I'm not God's gift to it. I don't know everything, but I have a certain way of working and a certain process, which means that strategy for me is the most important part at the beginning to get a great campaign, hands down, in any form of advertising, but more so I think especially in the dubious world of influencer marketing, where we need to really understand what's happening, and especially if clients are asking me to justify why influencer marketing is working.
What's the best influencer marketing campaign that you've worked on?
So at my previous role at Peg, we'd come up with a few sort of frameworks after a bit of research, and we ran a campaign for a company called Beryl. They make the bike lights for Boris bikes. And then they switched it and went, okay, we'll actually make a consumer-facing product. The process we went through there was strategy, which understands the audience, creative, the way people use YouTube or Instagram and content, understanding, so it was obviously for a cycling audience, understanding more than just going, a bike light, yes, great, it's good for safety. But beyond that, the brand stands for something as well. So we're actually targeting an audience which is very much a keen cyclist, not just a commuter, like they're willing to go out in the winter, in the rain and continue cycling. So the creative narrative there for me, we were so happy with, because what we ended up with was a creator and an audience, which was a perfect balance. It took time, it took us probably about 3 or 4 weeks to find that person and create the right strategy. But we got to that point and we were like, right, we've nailed it. It does take a long time, but we're going to have to understand that to do it right, that's the way you're going to have to move forward with campaigns like this. And then when we executed the campaign, we found a solution to basically ensure we drove sales by creating a productized element, which was a 4-week training plan, which the influencer had given us the training plan, and the brand had turned it into a beautiful, what was simply just a PDF document, which if you brought the product, you got that free. And so we broke even. It was, a small campaign, but we broke even. And I was super proud of it because we managed to, create a campaign that worked and proved that you can drive sales. And in the end, the conversion rate was 11 times higher than any other marketing channel they'd ever used. But on top of that, we'd managed to get from end to end, tracking the whole thing, click-throughs to sales.
I was going to say, I didn't realise that Peg actually did the campaigns themselves. So was doing the campaigns a means to an end so that you could use the data platform to be able to track it and say, look, now we can do end-to-end?
Exactly. We never wanted to go down the route of being necessarily an agency, but we knew that when we had done the research, and it's all well and good sitting in a room going, this is how you can do it effectively, unless we actually do it and prove it, it's worthless. It's just stuff on a piece of paper. So we were just working on a small scale to, like you say, test our theories on campaigns to see if they worked, to then be able to optimize that and create better versions of those frameworks and tools that brands could use. But all of that information and all of those learnings then went back into the product. So how do we make it easier to track all of those things? How do we make it potentially a self-serve platform where you can connect the dots yourself and you don't need us? And how do we make it more advanced than other reporting tools? To the process that we've been through, actually having done campaigns, now we can go, okay, this was really difficult, but we could make it easier by doing X, Y, and Z. So it was all just feeding back into, we have a product that is a search tool and a reporting tool, but unless we know how to run a campaign, how do we optimize it for people who we're selling to, who are doing this day to day and managing them all the time? So
we haven't really talked about your transition to when you went to Peg. So you left the agency and went there. How did you get lured?
So I, at the time at Hey Human, we were looking for an influencer platform, and speaking to their sales team and what we were trying to do, there was just sort of a clear chemistry between, actually, you guys, you think the same way we do. And one of the sales guys at Peg at the time just said, you should probably have a chat with Nick because there's a bigger thing here in this week. And they were sort of, I wouldn't say young company then, but the opportunity for a startup to work, maybe there was an opportunity for us to do something collaboratively that might help both parties. I met with Nick and just started talking to him, and there was a great dynamic between both of us of getting on and understanding where and what we were trying to do, and our vision sort of aligned. And I suppose, like any sort of good date, he propositioned me at the end of it and just asked, what my thoughts were and of coming and potentially joining that team. And it was difficult for me because I was at an agency where there was something happening and I really enjoyed the camaraderie of being in an agency, but then the opportunity to sort of really focus on an area which was starting to get me excited, and I was like, and work for somebody who had created with the rest of the team a vision and strategy and a focus which I could really buy into. And as a personal preference to me, or personal belief, that's 99% of the job, or the satisfaction you're going to get is believing in what you're doing. And so that move then just sort of became, actually, I'm going to go across. It might be a risk, but actually it was too good for me to turn down. And so going into that space and starting to really learn and think about it in a different way sort of really helped shape sort of where I am today, and sort of the work I do and the thoughts and opinions or stuff I've been able to prove over the last 18 months of how this industry can be effective for brands.
I suppose the big thing that you were really working on proving was that return on investment for direct-to-consumer brands.
Yeah.
So the biggest question I feel is return on investment. What is your advice to a brand coming to you who are dipping their toe into influencer marketing for the first time? Do enough of them come to you and actually know what they want?
I suppose there's a couple of responses to that. The first one, people who want to dip their toe into it and just have a go, my advice to those people is, don't just dip your toe in, just do it. Because if you have a small budget of, let's say 10 grand, what are you going to prove? It's so difficult. And again, I could do it on a small scale or whatever it may be, but really, is that enough to get what you're desiring out of it? Put some money into it, think about it properly. And also, if you're suggesting just dipping your toe in, my response on top of that is also, when you say you dip your toe in, that feels like you're just going to wishy-washy, have a crack and see what sticks. do some proper strategy and thinking, turn it up a gear and make it, okay, now I'm going to commit to this. It may not work, but at least I've given it a proper go.
Do you think too many people do come in and say, I just want to, I'm hearing lots of people talk about it, so I'll give it a go?
Yeah, I think there's an element of that, but also I think to the second point you made, which is, do people know what they want? That sort of plays into it as well, because they go into it, yeah, people are talking about, I'll probably have a go at that, but they don't know why they should be doing it or what it is that it's doing for them. So it's the same principle of, if I'm the client for you, my question is, but what do you want to achieve from this? Because if you want to drive performance straight away, you're not going to do it with 10 grand or by dipping your toe in. So I think they sort of go hand in hand, where commit to it, have a proper bash at it, think about what you really want from it, because you can make all things work with it. It's a great awareness driver, it's a great performance driver, but unless you set that standard of, I want X, Y, and Z, or just the single thing you want to achieve, there's other things you could be doing and other things I could be doing as well, because no one knows what's going on. And at the end of it, you present a load of results and people just go, what am I looking at? And that's where I think people need to change their mindset a bit about it.
What would you say is the minimum to come in and do it properly, trial it out properly?
Again, I think it's always a question that clients ask, how much should I spend for it? How much is X person going to cost? How much is this? I would never want to put a price on it, but if I had to, I would say, look at something 40 to 50k, maybe that's a good start point. But it also depends what you're after, because just look at the data of what average conversion rates are. If you're trying to drive performance, sales or click-throughs or whatever, you can look very quickly and go, well, if the influencer average click-through rate is on YouTube or whatever is 2%, if I'm putting 50k on it, and I'm going to get X reach, I could get X, Y, and Z back. Is that as good as Facebook or other channels you could use? Within that as well, then, my point is, okay, if it's not, this is where I go, this is why you need to think about strategy and spend some time rather than just dipping your toe in, is we can make it better and we can turn that up, but you need the time and the money to be able to really get a solution and a positive, or at least some learnings off the back of it.
I mean, you mentioned with your bike light campaign that was an 11 times return.
Yeah. What's
your biggest return that you've done on a campaign?
A lot of them after that have probably sat around, depending, I've had, up conversion rates of probably 6-7%, which, there's variables across the board of what kind of campaign and how much people are spending. But that, I would argue, if you could have a conversion rate of 2%, but this is why I always go back to the data point of 2% compared to somebody who's got 20%, you might go, oh, well, they've got 18% more than me. But actually, if you've got a product with a lifetime value of £1,000 and they don't, that 2% could be worth so much more.
Do you put that into the proposal at the beginning when a brand comes to you and says, we want to do this, and say, this is the type of thing that we could achieve? And do you have minimum guarantees on things as well?
The minimum guarantees would always probably be the base level of what the average is. I will always caveat at the beginning of a meeting, this is your budget, this is what the industry average is, this is the baseline of what we can expect. I always ask the question to brands, what is your lifetime value? Because the difference being is, if you've got 50 grand and a £50 product, I've got to get 1,000. But if the lifetime value is 600 quid, I only have to get 84 signups. That's a different ball game altogether, because I know now that actually I can make your 50 grand work, or whatever it may be.
Are they often aware of the lifetime value of the customer?
Variable. I think it depends what sort of industry you're in, and again, it comes down to the vertical of your product, where you're sitting, and within the FMCG, I think they do a lot of influencer marketing. It's very difficult to drive performance with that because of the tracking side. That's where a lot of brands go, I can't track it or value it. Well, it's the same principle of then, I used to work in agencies, Kate, with your PR, and they would go, we've got a double page spread on the Metro this morning. That means 5 million people saw it. And I'm like, well, you can take one off that because I just read the sport. And I didn't see the ad. So again, that attribution, if you're FMCG, you've got to find a model in a way which either, okay, I'm selling something in shop, or as I sort of allude to with FMCG, if you put money into it, you could go actually, if I'm making a fabric softener, get the influencer to create their own fragrance and repackage it, because you can get a sense then of, oh, all of them sold out. So that's probably more associated with the fact that it is that person who's driven that, or, attach a coupon to it. So that's how you get hold of it. You have to have this to go into a shop and buy, or whatever it may be. I mean, at the top of my head thinking there, but the point is it's thinking in those ways about what's going to work and what isn't.
We're definitely seeing more brands do direct collaborations with influencers, like in the beauty space. And just thinking with your fabric softener, it's probably a perfect one for Mrs. Hinch, P&G.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of people are in-housing influencer marketing at the brands. What are your views on that?
If you've got the right people, I don't necessarily see a huge problem with it. I think it all comes down to what the infrastructure is and who's doing it. I think.
Do you think you can risk take in the same way when you're in-house as opposed to being an independent agency?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, that's for them to decide. And I suppose that I've never worked the brand side, so I don't know the ins and outs, but what the sense I often get is their reluctancy sometimes if you're working with them is, same reason why they're asking questions is what's the performance on it, what's the ROI, all of those things, is because there's a pressure there that they have to deliver direct to someone, and they've got to go, at the end of the day, where's the money at? Because even if they're working with an agency, and I've sat in many agency meeting where at the beginning of the year it's we need to drive sales, and then you have your 6 months review and they're like, we've driven no sales, and the agency have argued but engagement rate is good, or the views are up, or whatever it may be. And the frustration is you're arguing that as an agency, or see people arguing that, but then the brand manager is going, well, this is no good for me because I need to have sales, because I've got to go back now to my line manager and go, I've spent £500,000 and got nothing back for it. So in-house, there may be more risk averse, but I think it's just, again, you can reduce risk by having a strategy and good thinking. And that would be my thing. If you're taking it in-house, what does that team look like? Because if you've not got a proper strategist or thinkers in there, and it's just being run, and no disrespect to them, but by sort of account managers or generalist marketing managers who sort of know a bit about it, that's when you're going to have problems, because they're not looking for the right things. I think gaming industry, mobile gaming, is a great example if you take something in-house where, having worked with them before, their marketing teams and performance teams sit together and it's one thing. And that's when you get the best results, and why gaming does so well. Even in the influencer space, they do incredibly well because they talk to each other and they communicate a message which is, right, okay, we've done X, Y, and Z, and what results has that driven? Well, it's driven this, but I understand data and I can tell you that actually if we just increase this, we can do that. And that then is, if you're taking it in-house, what you need and what that structure has to look like.
Do you think that communication in general is one of the biggest problems in the space that we have? As a relatively new market, there is a lot of competition. There are more agencies than ever before starting, that people undermine each other when speaking to brands.
Yeah, I suppose. Look, I move around agency to agency, and I think the biggest thing is when you get a client who's worked with another agency and they go, oh, this is why I didn't like them, this is X, Y, and Z, and it's this little, they're not transparent enough or whatever. I think on that level, you're running a business. You have to, in a way, dog eat, you've got to find a way to be better than the other person. At the same time, I think communication is a massive problem, because if we're going to work in this industry, if you are an influencer agency and solely working in that, you should be talking to each other. What works best, what doesn't, because that's where we can improve it, and that's where we get better results. And ultimately, that's where there's more money in influencer marketing for you as an agency, because brands all of a sudden go, okay, we can see the benefit now because we're working this way, and I can track it and I can measure it. And whether you've got one client or another, you've got a bigger piece of the pie already, as opposed to scrapping around at the moment, which often happens, I think, is with influencer budgets and stuff like that. It's who owns it, where does it come from, and it's a small piece of a big pie. Whereas if you can improve a business and an industry and make it work across the board and talk to each other and share your insights, it's beneficial to everyone. And you've got to get a step away from that fear of, oh, but they'll know all of our secrets. Well, they're going to find out at some point, because, you know, there's 200 people in your office and someone might get a job there, you know, in whatever it may be. So share, communicate, make it a better industry to work in, and add value across the board.
Do you go to any influencer industry events?
I go to a few now and again. I find them, in general, I find a lot of industry events quite taxing, because I feel often it's an opportunity when people do talks, it's just, look how great we are, as opposed to giving, again, real insight into something or sharing something, you know, and no one ever turns around and goes, we did this campaign, it was terrible, but this is why it was terrible, because they sort of don't want to have that thing. I mean, the biggest surprise, I suppose, for me in terms of how big influencer marketing was last year I went to VidCon in LA, and it blew my mind. Like, just teenagers having meltdowns because they've bumped into somebody, you know, with 100,000 subscribers, and just absolute chaos.
Apparently, it was the year for TikTok at VidCon.
Yes, yeah. But it was coming out, I think, around, they were sort of picking up last year.
I think I read something on LinkedIn about the TikTok after party.
Yes, yeah. There was that. I wasn't invited to that one, so I was too busy having a meltdown over influencers.
Who would you have a meltdown over? Which influencer gives you hot flushes?
Do you know what? Not so much hot flushes, but I don't watch a lot of. I watch it when I have to. I'm not the biggest nerd in terms of who's who. I do enjoy Jack Mates, I think, is for what he does and what he creates. When people talk about authenticity and things like that, like, he's very much, and there's probably a reflection of the fact that he's, you know, which may be controversial to some people, but he's good mates or is a big fan of Ricky Gervais as well. And I see a lot of that where he's somebody, to me, who he's not afraid to say something and speak something, but knows the line and the cuts. And I have a lot of respect for that. And his content is always the same and interesting, and it's producing stuff, but potentially makes it very hard for brands to work with because of the controversy and who he is. But a lot of time for him as an individual to go for so long, and you know, as an entrepreneur, I suppose, in his world of having podcasts and books and trying to do lots of different things and not sticking to a single narrative, I think that's something which attracts me to him.
When you're speaking to clients about brand safety, is that something that comes up a lot? And do you have to say, well, if somebody isn't afraid to share their opinion, then that is authentic? People do engage with that in a different way than somebody that's saying that everything is their favourite.
Yeah, when you talk about authenticity, I argue that maybe something we could talk about in a bit more detail, but I would argue that authenticity in this industry is on the decline, like massively. Like, it's hard to find because brands will work with anyone who they think, just because the audience is right, that they'll do. And your influencers and creators, whatever you want to call them, will work with everyone as well because they're being paid and it's a job now. Like, that's how they run it. In terms of speaking about brand safety and all of those things, I think that's the point for me, is always there's two levels. There's one, brand safety of who have they actually worked with before, because it's not just about, oh, they've worked with a competitor. It's if you're Calm app and you want to work with somebody, but 2 weeks ago they worked with a brand like Superdry. My questioning is, but why? Because they've just given out a message of, oh, Superdry, it's a bit sort of, you know, high intensity, rock and roll, whatever the brand story is. And now 2 weeks later, they're going, well, it's good to relax. That for me just feels a bit
jarring.
Yeah. So that's one of them. And then in terms of brand safety, look, everyone's a human being. No one knows. They could be the most clean cut person, and then a week later they do one thing and something horrific happens. You can't manage that, but you have to just take the responsibility of just doing a bit of due diligence and background checks. And people don't forget things, but also gets brought up a lot of the time with creators who've done something 5-6 years ago. Anyone who comes into the limelight, my advice would be delete your Twitter and Instagram and start again, because you might have said something which is completely taken out of context. But it's up to the brand to really consider what they may have done before and have a look for that and ensure that's sort of plain sailing. At the same time, if you've done the strategic preparation up front, you shouldn't really be delving into a world where there's potential something's going to go wrong, because you know exactly why you're working with that person and they're the right fit for you.
You've talked about authenticity being at an all-time low within the influencer space. Do you think, though, that consumers and audiences are much savvier now about branded content, that it means that actually good ones will rise to the top?
Yeah, exactly. I say it's low, I think, because Instagram is predominantly the darling of influencer marketing, or it feels that way. But content often is clearly an advert. And I don't just mean that it's got an ad next to it. I say to people all the time, look at someone's feed. Like, Instagram was built and designed for us to share our lives, you know, whoever you are. And I look across and all of a sudden I go, right, the X person, they post pictures of, you know, themselves and their life. And then all of a sudden there's this studio edited visual in their feed and it's got ad next to it. And that's where I'm like, well, that doesn't fit their content. That doesn't fit their platform, their channel, or anything like that. So that for me is where the authenticity, because then you're looking at it and you're going, well, we'll just put it on there. Well, no, as a brand, you need to be going, we need to get them to create or think about how we can fit it into there. The other thing as well with authenticity, I think, is, and I often scroll through, make sure they're the right people to work for by just going, okay, well, how many ads have they done? There's some channels which are basically just every post is an ad. So they're not running an Instagram channel, they're running an ad platform. That's what it is. So the authenticity, and unless people are following because of, I want to see brand adverts all the time, like all of a sudden I'm like, well, if you're doing this every day, there comes a point where I'm like, you can't love all of these brands the way you're saying, or they can't be perfect for you. That for me is where the authenticity is starting to drift a huge amount, because it's just not being managed in a way that people from both brands and creators are understanding or appreciating their audience and the platform that they've got and how they really translate a message across the board.
I agree. I do think that the accounts that can get away with doing ad after ad after ad are the accounts that are really creative, but then that's actually the audience is engaging with just how cool the photograph is as opposed to the brand within it. Exactly.
I mean, there's a balance there because you're creating content in a different way. I always think of it, to talk to clients or people coming into the space, I would tier people. And you've got, for me, digital first creators, we touched on it earlier, but the people, they were born and bred on YouTube. They gave birth to influencer marketing, which is a random boy or girl in their bedroom with a camera decided to tell you about their day. They're the people who've grown an audience on their own, and a digital audience. They're the people often who understand how platforms work, how to make content. They also understand how their audience works and how they can interact with them. And I think they often have that currency, like I say, of trust. And that's what we're buying at the end of the day when we're working with influencers. You then get into the realms of your celebrities or whatever you want to call them. I've come off Love Island or, Kylie Jenner or whatever. They can have an impact. But as a brand looking to work with them, I have to make that decision up front of what is that content going to look like, because they're not content creators, they're not creative. So that's when you get into the world of just someone holding a product and posting it on Instagram or whatever it may be, because that's all they know how to do and that's what they think influencer marketing. And it's two different stories. Now, don't get me wrong, it works. I think for the industries like fast fashion, the reason why they're so successful is because we're buying with our eyes in that case, so I can see how a shirt looks, how a dress looks. I can buy it and it's a decent price point. It's not breaking the bank. Therefore, consideration on that product isn't high, so I can do it instantly. But if I'm trying to tell a story or engage, I need to find someone who can be creative and understand how to intertwine my message and narrative into that content. And then the bottom tier of that is just content sharers. So for me, they're people who, they live outside of Instagram. So they may be an artist and they've just done a painting. They take a picture of it and put it on their Instagram. So I'm following them because I love the gallery they've created. I wouldn't want to work with them really, depending, on Instagram, their stories may be great, or they may have a YouTube channel, which may be how-tos, but if that's all they do, just because they've got a large following, I'm not going to work with them in the world of influence, because I'm just going to potentially disrupt their feed unless I can find a way to integrate my product into the kind of artwork that they do and tell a story and things like that. So
musicians have done that quite well with they do covers of things, but then I think it was Dodie did a bespoke song for Skittles.
Yeah, exactly. But that's when you get creative with it. But in the realm of that, my thing would be, are they an influencer, which is like, I'm a musician who's built my following on YouTube, or am I just Lewis Capaldi? Because for me, and again, the conversation, people are like, we could use him for, and Oreo did a thing with him. My question is whether they define it as influence or that's an old school celebrity
endorsement,
partnership or endorsement, not influencer marketing. So again, where do you draw that line of what we're trying to achieve and what we're trying to do? Because not just because you have a following or you do something, people know you, shouldn't put you into a category of an influencer. You're a musician. But at the same time, I appreciate and understand where that narrative comes from, which is people love them. Can they influence yes, potentially we'll use them in our influencer campaign.
What is the biggest budget you've ever had for an influence marketing campaign?
There's a campaign which we are about to work on, which will be upward of $1 million over the year.
Yeah. And is that spread across all different tiers of influencers, or
that's what we're working out at the moment? And there's another campaign which we are looking for next year, for 2020. And the shift that I'm making with the strategy is purely not just focusing on it as an influencer only sort of silo. So how can we feed influencer marketing into social and your social channels? One of the best examples, actually, I think 2016, I always say her last name wrong, but Megan Ranks, I think it is, did a partnership with Old Navy. And she created a piece of content on her YouTube, which talked about the brand and the products. And she did a couple of pieces of content on YouTube. But she then went into a studio and created, I think it was about 12, 30-second to a minute long different sort of adverts in her style. So it was like how to dress for a date, how to pack for holiday, how to turn a dress into 4 different outfits, and all of these things. What excited me by that was, okay, now you're integrating a campaign across all of your touch points. So strategically, what I'm looking at in 2020 is, okay, if you've got £1 million budget, personally, it's wasted if you're just doing influencer marketing. But what we can do is use the influencers and the strategies we have and the people in place to go, actually, okay, can we make content for Facebook using that person? Can we create content for your channels, but for brand-owned channels on Instagram? How can we use the influencer for programmatic? How could we use them on your website? How can we use them?
Would you ever use outdoor?
If it works and, and if it's right. Again,
I think outdoor actually does work pretty well with influencers, because as soon as anyone sees them outside, then they take a picture and it goes back online.
Yes, exactly. To all of those touch points, it's going, okay, we start here with influence, but actually we can use these people in a different way. And if you've got a big budget, after about 6 months, it's hard to spend 100k a month on just finding creators who do videos every now and again. And how long does that go on for? Whereas actually we can use less creators. Of course, we can tier creators, and we can do an always-on strategy, which may just be mentions or integrations. But then we can do hero pieces and consider ways of bringing the creators more into your world and really establishing a partnership, which does happen, but not over a long-term sort of process. We spoke about it earlier, but Space Ape Games did an amazing one with a game they produced called Fastlane, where they took 12 creators, made them characters and put them into the game. And I'm not sure off the top of my head if it was about 3 times growth for their business that single game had made. That's just thinking completely differently about, they could have just gone, play the game, would you? But they didn't. They went, no, you have an audience that I can add value to by letting them race you in the game. And that all of a sudden becomes a completely different beast. And it's no longer just influencer marketing. It's performance marketing. It's social strategy. It's digital strategy. It's a full endorsement, fully integrated into the brand. And I think that, for me, is where then all of a sudden influencer marketing turns up a gear and gets exciting.
So when you left Peg, you went to Tailify?
I'm at Tailify at the moment. Yeah. So
what does Tailify do?
So Tailify is a influencer marketing. I wouldn't call them an agency, really, although they have the facility and we run campaigns. Agency, I would suppose, is, depending on the terminology, they could be, but ultimately, it's specialising in delivering really effective influencer marketing.
Are they platform-based?
They have a platform. So they have again, one of the things what drew me to them was a really interesting process, which they sort of cold-headed, warm-hearted. So the cold-headed part of that is, which for me is exciting, but it's the data.
Yeah.
You've got to understand the bare minimum and the data and the insight behind everything that's going on. And then the warm-hearted side of that is creative. Let's engage properly with our audience and let's create something which is tangible and people want to be part of and feels very distinctive and unique, but creatively excels. That sort of is a process which a lot of people could learn from that.
How old is the company?
I think there must be about 4 years or so. But yeah, doing amazing things, really exciting. I love working with them. Prior to that, I was obviously working more as a consultant, really, both sides of like brands, agencies, but I spent sort of a bit of time.
And you can still do that?
Yeah, I can still do that. And working with Tailify is fantastic, and long-term, super excited to be working with them because the vision that they have and what they want to achieve is incredibly exciting and ambitious and challenging, but ambitious, and that's sort of something that would be incredible to be a part of. The flip side and the outside, I still work with, different brands and agencies and do bits and pieces, whether it's just consulting in terms of just giving a bit of advice or presentations and workshops and things like that, which, I can still do. The most interesting part for me, though, was very much during a period of before Tailify was working directly with creators themselves. And that opened my eyes to, again, I often before that looked at the brands as the people who were destroying the industry. And then I realized very quickly that actually the creators are sometimes at fault.
In what ways?
I think 50-50, they're at fault sometimes because they've got no guidance. So some of them really want to do well in terms of it's a career, it's something I'm passionate about, and I feel I can have an impact, but they don't, they haven't come from a world of business or marketing, so they don't know how to build a brand. So they don't have an idea of what their personal brand is, which is why they often, and we touched on it earlier, work with multiple brands.
Were the influencers that you were working with, were they outside of management?
No, they're all, so some of them were, and then some of them I went into management companies to directly sort of help. The principle really is, what's your brand purpose? Because if I look at your content and think of all the brands you've worked with, what's going on? Like, who are you? And so for them, they are people who have built for them but don't understand what it is to be a brand or have a purpose. So I would run workshops with them, which is more about getting them to think about, like, what is it that you want? What is your message? What do you want to get across? But the big question at the end is, right, let's go over the last 6 months and look at all the brands you've worked with and tell me which ones now you understand what you're trying to, who you would have worked with. I would say, 99% of the time they would go, oh, I've actually worked with a lot of brands here which don't fit my profile. The flip side of that is within the management world is... They're
like, don't tell them not to work with as many people.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. Because they're like...
That's my revenue.
Yeah, that's my revenue. So the management are driven by getting money off them. And it's because a lot of management, I wouldn't say every single one at all, but a lot of them, that they've been established from old school management companies. They used to manage actors and actresses and whatever it may be. So it was endorsements or partnerships. So their ethos and mentality is, I need to get you jobs and sell you to make money for my business. As soon as you're not selling, see you later. My viewpoint on it was, I get that as an old model, but if you are an influencer or positioning yourself as an influencer with a very clear brand purpose and you select the brands you're working with, two things happen. The first one is your audience understand who you are. And therefore, as a result of that, when you work with brands, you're going to be more impactful and people are going to go, okay, I understand this brand must mean something, because they're not exposed to it every day, and you sort of have the right to be able to go, I really like this brand, like it means a lot, it sits well, and you create an audience that are like you. They're there for the right reasons. The offshoot of that then is twofold. One, you can turn around to brands and when you do work with them and charge more money. And the justification is, I can charge more money because I can deliver you better results. Because people buy into me for what I am. I only work with a few brands, but when I work with them, they're bang on the money and I drive results. So therefore, if you don't want to work with me, but I've got a click-through rate of 25%, go somewhere else and find 25% click-through rate. So the mentality then is for them to understand who they are and shift, and they can earn technically more money in this concept or ideal. For the brands may then turn around and go, but I'm not paying any more than X. But my response would be, do, because you're getting better results. So it's hand in hand. So the responsibility lies a lot on everyone involved. And again, to the communication point, it's not just brands and agencies talking to each other about campaigns, it's working harder with influencers and creators to go, right, let's actually think about what you're doing and how you're managing this. And, you know, it's a murky world because, like I say, you know, when you get people who come off Love Island, they know, and they get management who go, right, you've got 6 months to make money.
Yeah.
You know, you've got 6 months to milk this for all it's worth, and we're going to work with everyone we can to make you money and get you deals. Because I don't follow a lot of them or any of them really, to be honest. Isn't that the concept of that doesn't appeal to me. But when that's the mentality, that's why influencer marketing has low conversion rates and click-through rates and engagement rates, because it's done in a way which is just chuck money out quick and fast. And to the first thing we spoke about, there's no strategy or thinking. It's just execution of use them. They're hot, right? They're hot topic. They're top of the feed. Let's just work it that way. And so everyone needs to start sorting out.
I think we need some new terminology as well to be able to differentiate between types of influence.
Massively, yes. Yeah. And you know, defining, always kickstart a meeting with, if you're getting into this for the first time, just stop for a moment and look at the dictionary definition of what influence is. And it's to change and have an effect on someone or something. So in its essence of what it is, and like the whole of advertising is built around getting people to buy something or do something, but this is an industry, when it started, that was built on paying someone who had an audience which trusted them because they were authentic, they could make stuff happen. If you lose that, and again, you don't want to silo it just to be a performance tool or whatever, but if you think back to doing that, like it is about making something happen, all of a sudden your mindset will shift to go, okay, but who can actually make something happen and how will they do that? That's when you'll start to, I think personally, start bucketing at least a top scale of influencer, which you'll go, okay, they can do something special for me.
I agree. And then finally, what are your predictions for what we're going to see in the influencer market in 2020?
I think it would take a bit longer than 2020, but the big one for me will be transparency of what I'm paying for when it comes to working with influencers. And by that, I mean, as an example, if I'm running a performance campaign, I know that if I need to drive sales or whatever it may be, I know I need to get X number of clicks or whatever it is that get me the results. I can kind of do that on Facebook, Instagram, Google, if I'm buying ads, because it will go, you'll expect X amount of clicks for this budget. That will become a point now where I think if I'm running a campaign like that, I always try and do it where I speak to influencers and I say, what is your click-through rate? Because you might be perfect for my audience, but if it's not high, I don't want to work with you. But also your click-through rate, if I'm buying you to deliver a performance campaign, that's what I'm paying you against. And that's the justification of you coming back to me to go, it's going to cost you 10 grand to do this video. And so I think that will be a big shift next year, will be people asking more questions around what it is, what value are you actually adding based on my brief, and being super transparent. You email an influencer now or a management company and go, we're interested in using them. And they come back and go, oh, just 5 grand for this. I'm like, but I haven't even told you what I'm doing yet. So how can you put a value on it? And at the same time, I can't remember the campaign, but I know last year or the year before there was a US fashion company that I think sued an influencer for under-delivering.
So the sunglasses case?
Yeah, potentially. And I think that for me will be, you'll see more of that happening where people will start to go, well, you haven't delivered, and there'll be more pressure on influencers and creators to deliver something, because it doesn't happen in any other industry. We let influencers and creators get away with so much. If I pay for a conservatory and I get half a conservatory, I'm going to ask for my money back because it's not, you haven't done the job. Why should we be letting them get away with that kind of, in a way, fraud of saying, yeah, it's going to cost you this, but I'm not going to tell you what we're going to deliver. So I think that'll be a big shift, transparency across the board of all creators and brands, and really being clear about what I'm getting back and what value I'm spending in the next 12, 18 months.
A big thanks to Adam for coming on the show. You've been listening to Blogosphere, Serious Influence, with me, Alice Audley. Join us next week for a brand new episode. Until then, be sure to check out blogospheremagazine.com for more influencer industry updates. And why not invest in a subscription to our essential magazine whilst you're there?